So now that My Hero Academia has completed, we can go over the full complete story of Bakugo. So before gaining his quirk, Bakugo takes on 4th graders while in the 1st grade that were trying to bully him. He says the most amazing hero always wins, showing his inspiration from All Might conquering every villain. He and Izuku had a similar regard for heroes, especially All Might. His strong personality and confidence, as well as talent in things unrelated to quirks, made his ego grow out of proportion. Any child who could be good at something with little effort would become that way naturally, I suppose, but this also encouraged his friends to look up to him and his seemingly endless talents, reinforcing his confidence. That is, and his drive made him aggressive when he gained his explosion quirk, leading to him bullying Izuku with his other friends because he didn't have one. It only got worse as he strengthened his powerful gift, becoming so skilled with it that he's considered a genius, a prodigy, we could even say. And when he would make a mistake like falling into water, Izuku rushed in to help, which only made him feel more vulnerable, and as if he was being looked down on by someone with no quirk. When the teacher asks their plans for high school, Bakugo's already intending to get into UA and surpass All Might, confident that he'll get in, and making sure to put down Izuku for dreaming he can get into the best school without one. But he also insults the entire class by calling them extras, his favorite expression to use. Already here, it's clear he's intimidated by the quiet strength of his childhood friend, wanting Izuku to stay weak so that he won't outdo him somehow. A bully he may be, but he's not a full-blown delinquent. He makes sure not to skip class like they do, and that's how he ends up alone, victim to the same sludge villain that had previously latched on to Izuku. But with his explosions, Bakugo's able to hold on to consciousness for longer. It doesn't help him to be free himself though, and he actually ends up worsening the situation by trying to fight back. Of course, that doesn't stop someone like Izuku from rushing in to try and free him. Izuku may be the one to receive All Might's praise, but the heroes on the scene are impressed with Bakugo's willpower and quirk against that villain. Afterwards, he confronts Izuku to let him know that he won't be thanking him, but that just seems like he is indirectly. Later, he attends the UA entrance exam, shouting at Izuku, but not touching him. And in the auditorium, he looks at Izuku's ID card to see if he's taking the exam in the same place, and seems extra irritated when he realizes that they're not. For someone who wants nothing to do with Izuku, he sure spends a lot of time watching him. He says his disappointment is because he wanted to crush Izuku in the exam, but we know better. Anyhow, he passes easily, as we all know. His usual weakness shows up though, with him getting most of his points from combat skills and barely any for rescuing or helping others. Bakugo's ego continues to be stroked when he's announced as one of 2 students in the school's history to ever get into UA, and you can guess the other. This time he's more focused on how a quirkless Izuku could be accepted to the school, and even tries to get him to change. When Deku doesn't back down, he lets it go. However, Bakugo isn't his usual fiery self in the new school and passes by Izuku with not much acknowledgement. It certainly doesn't stop him from arguing with the straight-laced Tenya, who rubs Bakugo the wrong way for being both a stickler and from a rich private school. From the very first day, Bakugo's used to an example of quirk usage. It isn't Aizawa's intention, but it helps to garner the attention from the class that Bakugo expects. And it doesn't hurt that he's trained his quirk to be as versatile as possible. The problem comes when Deku shows off his new quirk, making Bakugo believe that he was lied to for years. Before he can confront him about it, Aizawa steps in, but that just gets Bakugo stewing in his anger even more. Maybe if Aizawa had let it play out, the later confrontation wouldn't have been as intense. And, well, then Bakugo gets to play a villain and destroys a lot of the building, hitting Deku point blank with an explosion. So, even though he takes down Deku like he wanted, his team loses. Considering Deku didn't even use One for All on him, it must hurt his pride even more. Realizing that he's not the only gifted individual anymore after seeing people like Todoroki pass the exam in moments makes it worse. With a chunk of his pride smashed, he can't help but get emotional, but still refuses to be consoled by All Might since he's intent on surpassing him. Aizawa tells him to not sulk over his performance when he could have done much better. If that isn't bad enough, when he tries to get chosen as class president, accident, Izuku's picked instead. Then, what was supposed to be a rescue training class turns into a battle against actual villains trying to kill them when they interrupt 13. After Aizawa tells them to evacuate, Bakugo gets blocked by a warp-using villain named Kurogiri and rushes in to attack, but ends up thrown elsewhere with Kirishima. He develops an unplanned connection to him who's not bothered by his rough attitude and way of speaking. Bakugo argues with Kirishima that they should head for Kurogiri and take him down. While Kirishima thinks it's more important to help keep their class safe, Bakugo's argument wins, feeling it's not necessary to defend them since they're strong. It's the right choice because Deku was about to be either warped away or decayed, depending on his timing. He pins Kurogiri to the ground, having noticed the physical body hidden in the black fog. But Bakugo kind of acts like a villain himself while he does it. Too bad he's not able to react to the Nomu built for All Might, and has to be saved. All he can do is watch All Might punch the Nomu, with no chance of stepping in to help. When a bunch of students check out their class, Bakugo puts his overconfidence on display and announces that he will beat them all in the festival. He doesn't care if this pressures his classmates to match his intensity or have to deal with their angry looks after the day of the event. He hears Todoroki declare war on Deku, thinking he chose the wrong classmate to do that with. Again, Bakugo's chosen as a representation of his class, and I don't know why the teachers think he's a good option just because he's smart. His pledge isn't helpful and only applies to himself. It's just another announcement that he's going to beat them all, but on an even bigger scale. Todoroki's out first for the obstacle race, but Bakugo can use his explosions in a number of ways, and that includes levitating above the frozen ground and racing to catch up. The minefield's an issue for Todoroki, but with Bakugo floating over it, he can try and take the lead. Except Deku uses them as stepping stools, igniting the mines, delaying Bakugo by enough seconds that he can't catch up, and ends up in third place. During the cavalry battle, Bakugo uses his team as tools to propel or catch him, not even calling them by name. But Monoma's taunting sets him off, and he shifts his focus to him instead, costing him some more points. Without meaning to, Bakugo hears the talk between Deku and Todoroki, but unlike his usual reaction, he doesn't say anything or disturb it, just quietly taking it in. Also, the tournament pits him against Ochako, who he can't remember at all. Yikes. After many fights, it's finally time for his match against Ochako. He underestimates her at first, not really knowing her, and then takes her seriously when he sees her determination, and figures Deku gave her some kind of plan to beat him. She nearly gets him with her mini meteor shower, if not for him risking his arms to blow them all away in a massive explosion. When he plans to go onto the attack, Ochako's used up too much energy, and he seems disappointed that the fight's over just as she gained his respect. He's so convinced that Ochako got the plan from Deku that he confronts him about it, but he's dead wrong. She even refused any help, wanting to do it on her own. And when the class try to make him feel guilty, he points out that she's tougher than they think. He's always been a very observant person. With Deku facing Todoroki, we get a special Bakugo commentary about the fight and noticing Todoroki's weakness when he only uses his ice. Bakugo also seems surprised at Deku's loss, either because he knows he's better at planning or because he was looking forward to their fight. That leaves Bakugo to Kirishima, his buddy. He uses the hardening's weakness that it can't be kept up after being hit multiple times. Then he's put against Tokoyami, with Dark Shadow having a massive weakness against light. Truthfully, Bakugo had no idea that that was the weakness and figured it out mid-battle by attacking non-stop. The final battle is an even match, with Bakugo having to go all out to keep the speedy ice at bay. But when it comes time for him to face Todoroki's fire side, his opponent gives up instead. This drives Bakugo crazy, grabbing Todoroki to figure out why. Not only does it hurt his pride to win in such a way, but it means Todoroki hasn't overcome his trauma, which he probably hoped that he had. His voice crack makes it hard to think that he was being his usual angry self, but Midnight still knocks him out. It doesn't help his case that he acts so ferocious during the award ceremony. A few days later, the class picks hero names, and Bakugo's are just horrendous. Honestly, ranging from King Explosion Murder, which doesn't sound like someone you want to be saved by, to Lord Explosion Murder, and they're all shot down. But the good news is, despite his personality, he got over 3,500 offers from pro heroes, second only to Todoroki. But the most surprising is the hero he chooses, Best Jeanist. Not only is the hero very calm, considerate, and demure, but he's high-ranking and pretty much the opposite of Bakugo. That doesn't mean Bakugo's okay okay with being told how to act, how to dress, and how to style his hair. And having missed out on the action at Hosu City, his regrets for choosing this agency grow exponentially. Best Jeanist still makes sure to give him advice on patrolling and how to deal with villains. It's not all about beating them up and big flashy fights, and he can't even speak to kids without terrifying them. He also feels like he fell behind. After seeing how much Deku's improved his quirk usage, and even styled it after his movements. The final exam should be a breeze, right? But the problem is that he feels like everyone is passing him, and he wasted his time, so his mood and tone are worse to deal with. And then he spares some time for Kirishima and his studies at least, and then the bomb drops. He's paired up with Deku to fight against All Might in his final exam. Could it get any worse? He intended to completely destroy the class with his power and reach the top. And as a duo, especially with the one that he wants to beat the most, that's impossible. But here's the thing. Bakugo also refuses to lose or fail any test. So he's not going to risk that just because he has to face All Might with Izuku, normally. Izuku wants to run, and Bakugo wants to fight, but the main problem is they aren't talking. And communication has been brief at best since Bakugo started coming to UA. When Deku won't stop yammering about how their only option is to escape, Bakugo loses it and makes him listen. He wants nothing to do with Deku and his quirk, and he plans to win all on his own. After they both get roughed up by All Might, Deku saves him and they regroup and cool down a bit. There's no escape without facing All Might first. That's just a fact. He's much faster, stronger, and more experienced than they are, even past his prime. So Bakugo comes up with a plan of attack that Deku goes along with, and they surprise All Might with their last second of teamwork. They succeed, and Bakugo choosing to destroy his body the way Deku usually does. And when he's left unconscious, Deku has to turn back to bring him along through the gate. They pass, but both end up with injuries that leave Recovery Girl frustrated with All Might playing the villain. At least Bakugo was able to face him with a smile. Going forward into the forest training arc, not much happens at first. He fights some dirt monsters, appreciates Koda punching Deku in the jewels, and learns to strengthen his quirk through continued use. You know, school stuff. Then villains attack, and Bakugo tries to get back to camp, only to bump into Moonfish, admiring his sadistic handiwork. All students are given permission to fight back, with Bakugo struggling to take down Moonfish without setting the forest on fire. Thankfully, Dark Shadow's uncontrolled destruction is enough to take on the villain. All that's left is to shrink him with some flames. When the target of the villain's attack is revealed to be Kacchan, he's forcefully protected by his group. Not that it keeps him from being grabbed by Mr. Compress from under their noses. It's Tsuyu and Ochako who notice first. As much as the group tries to get him back, they're tricked by his quick hands and only free Tokoyami from Mr. Compress. As Bakugo's dragged into the portal, he tells Deku to stay back. This has always been a complicated moment. Seeing as Bakugo has a lot of anger for Deku and his new quirk, but he's in a very dangerous situation, and possibly doesn't want Izuku to risk his body saving him. Or does he just want to escape on his own? Considering the villains around him, Bakugo's able to wear a brave face, and even tries to shake his way out of their hideout. Eventually, All Might's team shows up to help him, until a different warp quirk sends him to meet the father of all evil. After every attempt at escaping is blocked, and All Might can't fight all for one while trying to protect him, Bakugo worries everything will get worse, until his classmates launch themselves into the air, with Kirishima offering a friendly hand. That's enough to convince him to be saved at last. After Mount Lady blocks the villain's pursuit, they mix in with the panicked crowd watching the battle between the two Goliaths on screen. As All Might's stamina and body start to shrink back to his thinner form, Bakugo worries for him and calls out in hope that he can still win. Watching All Might's weakened form pointing at the screen and Deku's reaction to it, he has an idea what's going on. Later on, he tries to ask All Might about his connection to Deku, only to be given the runaround. And he may be a lot of things, but stupid is not one of them. On a side note, the fact that Bakugo's mom, a hothead like him, could understand Aizawa's attention to each student and wouldn't let any harm come to Bakugo just shows us where he gets those traits from. The students move into UA dorms to keep them safer from the many villain attacks and probably his kidnapping. He pays Kirishima back for what he spent on supplies, and when the class has a room contest, he goes to bed early. He's probably still reeling from the events that caused All Might's retirement. Next comes preparations for the provisional license exam by refining quirk techniques. That's also when he creates his AP shot, with a piece of cement tumbling towards All Might, who Deku protects. This makes his blood boil again. On the license exam day, one student pretends to be friendly with them all, and only Bakugo sees through the facade, showing once again that he can read people easily. And when the next exam starts, he goes against Deku's advice for their class to stick together, blasting off on his own. That leads him and his gang into the meatball-using student, with Kirishima taking the attack when Bakugo's mind isn't as focused as it should be. Seiji keeps blabbing about how he doesn't act like a hero, and he's a disgrace. But it just makes Bakugo taunt him more, telling him to put his money where his mouth is. In other words, actions are worth more than words alone. With victory in mind and slowly turning into a chunk, Bakugo sends a grenade for Kaminari to use on Seiji. When he and Kirishima are free, they end the clash and continue the exam. The second phase doesn't go as well since Bakugo doesn't know how to talk like a regular person, and even though his advice is sometimes good for the rescuees, the way he delivers it loses him points. He actually ends up failing, which means he has to do extra courses to get his license. That same night, Bakugo asks Deku to meet him outside, but what he really means is to get everything off his chest and blow off some steam at the same time. Because of how fiercely he's coming at Deku, expecting to have all the answers to his frustration, it goes too far. Despite him complaining that Deku overthinks everything, Bakugo does the same. He just lashes out as a result. Aizawa is the first to hear about the brawl, but All Might takes over. When he explains more about his quirk and why he chose Deku, Bakugo starts to feel less responsible and bad about not having been chosen. This allows a weight to be both lifted from him, but also a massive secret to be pressing on him. It helps him to reflect on his connection to them and to become a better hero. As for punishment, Bakugo has a few days suspension from class and cleaning to do. Going forward into his remedial course, some unruly kids are brought in, and of course Bakugo is terrible at dealing with them. But so are the other students there. At the same time, he pinpoints that a leader is there controlling their actions, and if they can turn that one to their side, then the rest will comply. When he's back in regular class, Kirishima wants to train with Bakugo, but he ignores him. So he can ask Deku about his quirk advancements, expecting that he's had some progress since he's the chosen one. With their relationship more stable at this point, let's take a pit stop to talk about Bakugo's skills. First, his quirk, called Explosion, allows him to excrete nitroglycerin-like sweat from his palms and ignite it to create explosions of various sizes. And with that, he's picked up a few special moves to go with it along the way, such as the Howitzer Impact, which is probably his strongest move, where he spins in the air to create a wind tunnel to strengthen the explosion that follows. Present Mike compares it to a missile. He also has Stun Grenade, where he creates a flash of light with his hands to make his enemy blinded, as well as the AP shot, the armor piercing shot, and the autocannon variant of it. It's a more directed explosion with intense firepower behind it. The autocannon version is faster but less powerful. It was then enhanced to machine gun to create stronger consecutive attacks. And then we have the Explodipole, where he grabs someone in the air and uses explosions to spin and then lets them go with momentum. This is useful for both enemies and helping propel an ally. And of course, that's not including his agility, battle intelligence, determination, stamina, or even his power that's only one grade below Deku's. Plus, he can use his bracers as landmines if he wants. But anyway, back to the school festival, where Bakugo doesn't want to perform after overhearing the other classes judging them and saying that they're arrogant. But they end up recruiting him to play drums, and he's immediately good at it. Shoto ends up encouraging Bakugo by explaining that hero work isn't always for others' sake, but also for self-improvement and satisfaction. That leads Bakugo to hype them all up. One thing that Bakugo is adamant about, and repeats often, is having an undeniable win or a perfect victory. No flaws or partial losses. And for the training against Class B, he insists that his team should follow his lead and support him, but also expect to be saved by him when they're in a pinch too. That way, no one will be left behind or captured. And that's exactly what he does, surprising Monoma, who's always known him as someone stubborn and selfish when it comes to battle, but his teamwork is on full display here. And the results are exactly as he wanted. proving that if he just changes his way of doing things slightly, he can go so much further than before. When it's Deku's turn, everyone, and of course Bakugo, is beyond shocked to see the black thread bursting out of him so violently. But rather than be scared, he meets up with Deku and All Might after to try and trigger it again. Not that it works. Then again, Bakugo thinks it's related to Deku being in danger, which he isn't in a controlled environment. Later on that year in December, Bakugo's got one more class before he can get his license, and when he passes, while out with All Might, he can't wait to take down some villains. Later, he and Shoto get congratulated by the whole class for succeeding. Now let's step to the side for a second and talk about the My Hero movies, which Horikoshi considers to be canon, but in my opinion it's kind of like pseudo-canon, somewhere in between actually having happened. But one in particular matters for Bakugo, and that's the Hero Rising movie, where it pits Deku and Bakugo against a lesser version of All for One by the name of 9. So in order for them to bring him down after nearly dying once, Deku transfers One for All to Bakugo. That way they can both use the powerful quirk against 9. However, before the transfer is fully complete, Bakugo passes out and doesn't receive the quirk as intended. In fact, he can't even remember why his arms got so destroyed. Still, that moment of sharing in Deku's quirk has effects much later on in the series. With nowhere to get some experience in, Bakugo is invited by Shoto to work in the Endeavor Agency. As a reminder, Best Jeanist is missing, so he can't go back there. He and Deku aren't as welcome as they'd like, but the goal is to catch a villain before Endeavor can, by using more than their quirk, but quick thinking and movements. They also reveal the things they want to work on. After a pretty awkward dinner at the Todoroki household, Shoto's brother Natsuo is taken hostage by a villain that Endeavor caught, and who wants to be killed by him exclusively. The boys have to take charge and face Ending, since Endeavor's too vulnerable about almost losing his son this way. At this point, Bakugo's chosen his hero name, but he's saving the reveal for Best Jeanist, so he won't tell anyone yet. Going further, we find out that the research All Might's done on the past users of One for All is shared with Bakugo as well, who studies the book carefully. He judges their quirks for being weak, until it's explained that the people had no choice but to pass One for All onto whoever they trusted around them. There's some rough training with Izuku, that anytime he can't use Black Whip, he gets blown up, giving him an afro. But I think it's just Bakugo playing with him. There's also the fact that Bakugo bullied Deku because of his insecurities and wants to make up for that somehow. Months later, Bakugo ends up in rear guard with Burnin, one of Endeavor's sidekicks, and isn't happy about it. He knows it means they'll be helping civilians and not doing battle. He takes it out on the residents by shouting for them to come out of their homes. Everyone's safely evacuated, and that's when Shigaraki awakens, decaying the hospital and everything nearby like a landslide of death. Bakugo and the other students rush to save as many people as they can by getting them in the air and away from the ground being destroyed. When he overhears One for All on the communication line, he goes with Deku away from the people they rescued to keep them safe, and to draw Shigaraki away. He insists it's not to help Deku, but for revenge for what happened with All Might. As they travel, they're not fast enough to avoid Shigaraki and visualize being crumbled, until Gran Torino shows up like lightning. Aizawa arrives with Rocklock and Manual to keep Tomura weakened, but that also puts a target on his back. With him in danger, Bakugo rushes over to help him, since Tomura's decay is nullified anyway. Despite being insulted and ignored by Tomura, who says he's not interested anymore, it doesn't stop him from fighting back. Then things change drastically. Tomura has 2 quirk-destroying bullets and wants to hit Endeavor and Aizawa with them. Bakugo destroys the one meant for Endeavor, but the other one gets through to Aizawa, unfortunately, leading him to have to cut his own leg off. He still blinks for a moment, and Tomura's unleashed. This forces Deku to take action, bringing Tomura into the air to avoid his decay touching the ground. Now below, just watching Deku and Tomura within his reach, he feels useless and wants to step in, but he also knows Deku doesn't have any regenerative quirks, so he's at risk of losing this fight when his stamina runs out. So Bakugo devises a plan to get Endeavor up there to cook Tomura Cajun style, but tendrils are released with All for One's help and stab Endeavor. Seeing more coming for Deku, Bakugo pushes his childhood friend out of the way without needing to think. Even heavily injured, he tells Deku not to do everything alone and falls down to be caught by Shoto. Tenya takes care of him on the ground, and he's conscious enough to be relieved to see Best Jeanist in action again. He escapes Tenya's care to help him and Lemillion in the fight against Nomus, noticing his quirks changing and advancing through pushing himself. And that's also when he gets to tell Jeanist his hero name, Great Explosion Murder God Dynamite, which he of course doesn't approve of. Meanwhile, Tenya keeps telling him to stop fighting, but Bakugo feels he has to in order to stop Jeanist, as he's the one holding down Gigantomachia. Bakugo passes out finally, taken to the hospital for some much needed treatment. 2 days later, with villains broken out of multiple prisons, including Tartarus, where All for One was, he awakens. He freaks out when he hears that Deku still hasn't woken up, and plans to kill him if he dies. You know, the usual. After the war and most of the League's escapes, Deku leaves letters for his class, and that includes Bakugo, who's been working alongside him all this time. The first thing he does is rip it, and announces that he's going to find him. He knows that Deku's working with the top 3 heroes because Best Jeanist won't respond to him, but neither will Hawks, Endeavor, or All Might. Class 1A ends up forcing Endeavor to reveal info, with Nezu's help. They track Deku to Kamino and take down the villain named Dictator, with Bakugo at the forefront. He tries to question Deku, especially about his mental state, but Deku just ignores it and insists that he doesn't need help. Sounding a lot like old Bakugo, but for a different reason. The class agrees to take him back by force if necessary. And at this point, Bakugo wonders if Deku sees them as extras or NPCs because he's unlocked so many quirks. As he tries to escape their traps, the speedier students are the ones left to change his mind. As much as Bakugo wants to make peace with him, he knows Tenya's the one made for this step in the plan, sending him forward with a move called Explosive Speed Cluster. After Kirishima catches them from this emotional moment, Bakugo reveals all the past pain and anger that he had, and all his feelings come out into the open. He even admits his body moved on its own when he rushed in to save Deku. That's when he apologizes for everything that he's put him through, making sure to use Izuku to show his sincerity. It takes some convincing from Ochako for the people wanting him elsewhere, but finally Deku can stay with them at UA, and they shove him in a nice warm bath. Bakugo considers them all rivals, not just Deku, for the #1 spot. He still struggles to call him Izuku though. Not long after, Class 1A is informed of Star's noble fight and death, and how she brought them an extra week of prep for the grand finale. This gives Bakugo time to test out his new cluster move, knowing that the fight is going to be tough, even without Gigantomachia around, and that was before he and the rest of them found out about Aoyama being the traitor. They end up using Aoyama to their advantage and catching All for One off guard, thanks to Shinso. With the teams already decided, Bakugo's part of the Shigaraki clash, along with Best Jeanist, Edgeshot, Mirko, Tamaki, Nejiri, and Deku. After successfully separating the villains, Toga's quick grab onto Deku throws a wrench in the plan. There's no time to wait for him to come back, so they fight to keep Shigaraki contained and down. If not for the evolution that Shigaraki's body manifests, they would have been doing decently well, especially having Monoma and Aizawa nearby to keep him from using the stronger abilities. But Bakugo's working with them like a proper team does, and hearing Shoto's win against Dabi gives them a positive boost to keep going. After that is when Bakugo becomes a straight up mech user, pulling out his suppressive heavy mobile unit, Strafe Panzer. Not only is it for defense, but it enhances his explosions without damaging his body as much. But as he gets too close, Shigaraki grabs him and brutalizes his arm in a terrible display of power. After being told that he's not interesting and flung around like a doll, he's stomped on and beaten, and then grabbed by the neck. Before he can be left as a present for Deku, Nejiri attacks Shigaraki. Bakugo almost becomes a shield until he shifts the direction, and Tamaki stabs Shigaraki from behind. Then as more hands are grown from the grotesque form, it gives Mirio time to get Bakugo away from the fight. He watches with tears of frustration and blood dripping down his face, analyzing every move, every minute, and everything Shigaraki does. Jeanist is shocked to see how tuned in Bakugo is while he works on his arm. After the big three use an unimaginably powerful combination attack, with Shigaraki surviving, Bakugo stands up. Thanks to the side effects of his new cluster technique, Bakugo is able to produce more condensed and powerful explosions that blow up all over his body. increasing his speed in a crazy way. He dodges and attacks, using the last of his stamina to strike with a massive burst. But at the same time, Shigaraki aims for his chest, impaling his heart from the hit. Seemingly as this is happening, Bakugo can see the vestige of All Might, realizing he never asked for him to autograph a training card. It's this moment that seems to point back to the short amount of time that he had One For All in his body, seeing as normally no one but a user can see the vestiges that way. Keep in mind that this sequence is somewhat ambiguous and up for your own personal interpretation. Bakugo lands hard on the ground, a cavity in his chest, and lifeless. Every hero shocked to see this, including Monoma, who seemed to always dislike Bakugo. Without wasting a second, Edgeshot decides that Bakugo's survival is worth the cost of his own life. So he begins to repair the damaged organs, trying to both sew up and restart Bakugo's heart. Shigaraki tries to stop their progress, taking down every hero there until Deku finally arrives. He's in disbelief at the sight of Bakugo's destroyed body, ready to attack like a wild, unthinking animal. But Mirio explains how Edgeshot's still inside of Bakugo, working on bringing him back. After it seems like Bakugo won't be back for the remainder of the fight, even if he does survive. And that's when he makes a grand entrance. And just in time to help save All Might from being ripped in half, thanks to Deku's gear shift to launch him over. After putting All Might in a safe spot, Edgeshot expels some blood from Bakugo's body to help him, but he's still suffering from the pain of his repaired organs. It turns out Edgeshot's technique isn't what brought him back. It was Bakugo's power from his sweat that did. A micro-explosion jump-starting his own heart. After receiving a gauntlet from All Might, Bakugo faces the de-aging All For One, grabbing his face disrespectfully. His new explosive abilities are so advanced that he can keep up with the villain, forcing him to not ignore him anymore. In desperation, All For One unleashes every quirk in his arsenal at Bakugo, something that he can't dream of overcoming. But he had a trick that he was waiting for. Some coated sweat beads he left in All For One's mouth to blow him up. It just took a bit longer for them to detonate, and because of that, and All For One's unstable state of mind unable to control his quirks, Bakugo's able to take him down with a massive point-blank explosion. Bakugo stands in front of him to block his path, coughing up blood. He can't attack anymore, but he can watch to make sure that All For One ends as planned. Wanting his absolute victory, he refuses to fall until he sees it through. Even as a baby, All For One shoots a quirk at him that Bakugo impressively catches with his mouth and blows up. Now, and only now, does Bakugo allow himself to pass out. Later, when he's being brought to the hospital, he overhears that All For One's still alive. Without hesitation, Bakugo uses explosions to get over Deku's location. Needing an extra boost, he gets Shoto to make an ice ramp to help take him down. Bakugo ends up saving Deku by attacking Kurogiri with a blast from his mouth, finishing the villain, leaving the rest to Deku to ultimately defeat All For One and Shigaraki, ending the war. After a week, the reconstruction of everything's at full speed, but Bakugo's body will never be the same as before. He had surgery for his arm, and the shape is normal, but he suggested to use prosthetics, which isn't what he wants to do. His quirk comes from his hands after all, so he chooses rehab. Despite being a mess, he insists on checking on All Might and Deku, only to overhear the shocking truth. Izuku's going to be quirkless again. He's lost one of his top rivals. All Might helps lift the mood by saying that he wouldn't be there if not for their help saving him. So they are great heroes already. They attend the graduation of the third years, and then it's back to class, and a surprise. Aizawa's their homeroom teacher again. He's supposed to be at the hospital, but he came for the ceremony, and will be fine as long as he's calm. This is Bakugo we're talking about, right? Bakugo's not used to positive attention, and apparently the new first-year students are very interested in him and Shoto. Not only is he telling Ida how they're behaving, but he wants them expelled for chasing him around. Later, he helps with the light cleanup duty and notices Edgeshot with his tiny body. He wonders if he's stuck that size, and the hero says that it's fine since his hands came back already. This makes Bakugo smile as we see a scar along his cheek like Deku. Ochako and Deku share their pain of not helping villains in need, and Class 2A joins them. But all Bakugo worries about is Deku using the remaining embers of One For All to get there. Unfortunately, that also lets the secret out, and the class cries for his fading quirk. Then a farewell party's held for Aoyama with everyone in attendance, even Eri. After much rehab and graduating from UA, Bakugo eventually becomes a true top pro hero. Then, 8 years pass, and well, Bakugo's still not very comfortable with people filming or asking him questions. His temper still gets the better of him, and he drops in the hero rankings, getting passed by Shoto easily. But, on the side, Bakugo led a project with Class 1A to get Izuku a new battlesuit similar to the one that All Might used against All for One, allowing Izuku to become a hero again and resume Bakugo's rivalry with him. As we see at the very end, Bakugo calls out to Deku to join him as a part of the greatest heroes. And that is the full story of Bakugo. If you liked the video, guys, please give it a like, and please subscribe if you haven't already. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.